Good morning, everyone. This is Jennifer Clark, the Operations Coordinator with the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'd like to be the first to welcome you to today's webinar session. Before I hand things over to NYSCADV Project Coordinator Naseem Sarabandi to introduce today's presenter, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items. We're going to be keeping all lines muted throughout today's presentation, so we do ask that any questions or comments be put in the chat box. And you do have the option to send any comments or materials to everyone that is on today or only to panelists and presenters. We are recording today's webinar, and a link to the recording as well as a link to the presentation slides will be shared in a couple of days. There is also a link to the presentation slides in the chat box for you to access them today. We are offering live captioning as well as ASL interpretation for today's webinar. You should find a button to turn captioning or view the live transcript on in your toolbar. And with that, I will hand things over to Project Coordinator Naseem Sarabandi.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to our amazing presenters, Nicole, and interpreters, ASL, and captioners. I'm Naseem Sarabandi, Project Coordinator at the Coalition. Before we going into the webinar, I want to welcome everyone. And today we are going to talk about interview guidelines and the rights of survivors and the things that they need to know. Our amazing presenter is Nicole from YWCA of the Union County in New Jersey. She's a STEP coordinator, which is a skills training empowerment program, and she holds a master in social work. She's been working with the survivors on their ability to become financially independent and gain a better or a new employment, and working on their interview skills and training. We had a webinar, two other webinars about the survivors career empowerment. The recording is available for them on the Google Drive. And this webinar and the next webinar next week is going to be about interview guidelines and mock interview and survivors' rights. Without further ado, I'm going to give the mic to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming. I wanted to get started with going over interviews because it's important to realize that clients, and honestly, a lot of people, including me, have troubles with interviewing when it comes to motivation and being able to focus on the questions and answering efficiently. It's really tough, especially when you're putting yourself out there for a kind of like oh, judge me right now, like ask me anything you want. I want to make it clear to clients that interviewers are not allowed to ask whatever they want. And that they have rights about what they can and can't ask. And that's, as advocates, we want to empower clients to be able to let them know, listen, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, because we know that when it comes to domestic violence, they've had the power taken away from them for so long already that in the middle of an interview, sometimes you do feel powerless if you don't know how to respond to a question, or you feel like you should answer a question, but you're uncomfortable answering. So it's just really important to talk about with clients. And this is from my experience working with clients, as well as when it comes to the illegal questions and legal questions to ask, these are general. So these are like, I would say in every state, individual states may have, smaller, different things, but these are like in general, what they're allowed to ask and what they're not allowed to ask. All right. But I wanted to go over this first because the last webinar we did was talking about careers. And something I wasn't able to touch on is if undocumented clients are able to receive education, specifically in New York, and they actually are through the New York State DREAM Act. So this has to do with people who have a DACA status. So that's when the parents may be undocumented and they came here with their child when the child was young and they have DACA status, but they don't have like permanent residency or anything like that yet. So this gives undocumented students and individuals access to grants and scholarships, including the New York Tuition Assistant Program. And then as well, undocumented students, they can get financial aid and state scholarships, especially if the scholarships are private, depending on what the scholarship is for. So it's definitely possible for undocumented clients to get an education in New York. And I urge people in other states to look it up because I feel that it is spreading now. And I was reading that there's nothing in legislation that technically says undocumented people cannot get an education in the United States. It's just the documentation that's asked for when it comes to financial aid. But when it comes to private funding, like private scholarships as well, it is possible to get an education. So it's always good to look into it if you have undocumented clients who feel that they want to further their education. Don't just push it aside because they may not have all the necessary papers. Definitely look into it, as I'm guessing we all do to begin with, but it may be hard to find, some of these scholarships, but it's definitely worth taking a look. And then I provided some of the information here on eligibility for the DREAM Act, and then you can apply with clients. But the DREAM Act, most of the requirements are about New York State being a permanent home, and they have to have one of the following. So they need to have a U visa, T visa, temporary protected status, or a DACA status. And then they had to have received a high school either equivalent or diploma in New York State and have enrolled within 5 or 10 years in an undergraduate program. So definitely go through the requirements, and then the application is not, it's not too complicated. It's really just to see if they are eligible. It says applicants without lawful immigration status will not be asked for a home address, and they don't have to upload any financial records. So that's very safe as well. So it's good to check. I would say it's very good to check for clients to see if it's possible. Okay. Oh, so now we're going to get into the interview guidelines. The objectives for this one is understanding just basic rights of employees, and this is specifically for New York State. But again, this is in a lot of states as well. Like this is in New Jersey. I would just make sure that you are familiar with your specific state when it comes to these, but these are general. Like you see these on all applications that employees have these rights that we go through. Understanding interview questions that are legal or illegal, common responses to inappropriate questions, and pros and cons to explaining past issues. Talking to the client about saying, listen, you can bring up any past issues that you need to explain to employers during interviews, but there are pros and cons. Okay. And then please, if you have any questions, just write in the chat box, and then I know someone will let me know that it's there. Okay. But to start, what we do as clients, I feel that, again, educating clients on rights, I feel like is one of the most important things when it comes to social justice as well. Like this is why we're advocates. We educate and empower clients to understand their rights because we want them to realize that they have self-worth, as everyone does. They may not see it after maybe a long time of being in an abusive relationship and being told that they don't have self-worth, but we want to remind them that they do. And that's very important. And that's why they need to know their own rights. And the general definition of a right, something you're entitled to based on the law, moral principles, and we all have these rights provided to everyone for just and equal treatment, or that's what we hope. So specifically for New York State, the human rights law, it protects victims of domestic violence from employment discrimination. There is protection. And for New York State, along with other states as well, the definition of a victim of domestic violence, it has to be a victim of a crime committed by a family or household member. And then this also includes anyone who's the parent of the child who is a victim, right? So the child as well. It is unlawful to discriminate against a victim of domestic violence in hiring for a job or other privileges when it comes to employment. And then we'll go through some instances where this could be, there could be chances to be discriminated against if you have to make the domestic violence situation known to employers if it comes to any sort of court dates. So when it comes to that, there's a way to tell employers about those kinds of things. And we're going to talk about that later on. But this is why prepping clients for interviews is so important, because they don't have to answer questions about their household situation and about really private instances that are happening in the home. They do not have to. In New York State as well, employers are required to give time off to DV survivors for certain situations. They have to be able to provide an accommodation, whether it be unpaid or a paid time off. A lot of the time when I've had clients ask at work if they can be, well, this is in New Jersey, but a lot of the times employer says yes, but they go unpaid. It doesn't really go under they don't take sick time for it. But they are required to give that accommodation. So that's if the client is seeking medical attention caused by DV, if they're receiving services from a shelter or a psychological counseling program, participating in any safety planning or taking actions to increase their safety. And then when it comes to any sort of court appearance is important as well. Again, this depends on how much the client wants to tell the employer. They don't have to go as far as giving details, but they can go into, I have a court date for a personal incident I had. Can I have this time off, right? It's all about the way the client words it as well. Because we need to teach them how to advocate for themselves. Listen, this is going on in my personal life. I need time off. Because as we all know, jobs are not our whole lives. And that's what I want to make sure clients understand. Like, a job is important. A job is important for surviving, but the health and family, that's more important than the job. It really is, especially when it comes to domestic violence. There are priorities. And then employees requiring leave from work for the mentioned circumstances. There are just certain things they have to follow. They have to give advance notice if possible. So for example, if a client has a court date, and she knows the date 3 weeks in advance, I know it can be stressful trying to find a way to tell the employer, but the sooner the better. So you may not even maybe take the day off if you can maybe flex hours instead of having to go unpaid. So it's always better to let the employer know as soon as possible. If there is no advance notice, the employer may say, hey, can I have some sort of court order or, documentation from some sort of doctor saying, the reason why you can't come to work. So they can ask that. If there's not enough advance notice given, if it's kind of, not scheduled, it's just the way they'll be able to ask for more information if necessary. But they are required to maintain confidentiality when it comes to DV situations. So they can't talk to other employees about it. They can't talk to, anyone else when it comes to that situation. And if the employer is a good employer, then it's not going to hurt the work that the client is doing there. That's what we hope. So interviews. I would say for a lot of clients, this is the hardest part. I do have some clients who have no problems with interviews, as there's, a lot of people who are fine with interviews and being able to verbalize their skills and what they're good at. But a good number of us, including clients, it's hard to be able to define the skills that you've used in your past jobs and make it relatable to the job that you're applying for and that you're interviewing for. It depends on the experience that the client had in the past. For my other 3 webinars, I always go over like a self-awareness, kind of doing a self-reflection before talking to clients about, whatever you're about to talk to them about. So for an example, when it comes to interviewing, you can go back at your own experiences as an advocate, applying for, either advocate positions or even just customer service jobs, and think of what's the experience you had with interviews. Are you good with interviews? Is there something that you have trouble with or you get stuck on? Especially if you were able to learn from that as a professional and then can give that information to the client. So like for me, if me personally, I had problems interviewing and going over my maybe my like really good skills or talking positively about myself. Some people have trouble with that. And then if I have a client who says the same thing, like, listen, I have a lot of trouble when people ask me what are my 3 greatest skills, I never know how to answer. So now I can kind of reach back into how I experienced that and say, well, this is from my experience, this is what's been able to work in an interview, right? It definitely depends on if the interviewer is respectful and present. There can be some really bad interviewers and it does not make the process any easier. Sometimes it's good to be able to see what the people at the organization that you're applying for is like. It's good to see that, but it's scarier when the interviewer doesn't really know how to give a good interview. Meanwhile, clients are just learning how to interview again, if they've been out of it for a while. So it does depend on the interviewer. And I always prep clients for if the interviewer is bad, just trying to stay on topic with the job. And it's still always bring it back to the job and what you can bring to the job. But it's hard to prep for a bad interviewer. And then, are there any questions that were confusing to the client, or a question that they couldn't really fully understand? Sometimes in interviews you'll have to be like, can you repeat that question, or can you word that question a little different way to properly answer it, right? Sometimes you need more clarification on a question, especially if the interviewer is not good. You're not going to be getting great questions, or the wording of the question is not going to be great. But this is what prep is for. So this is why we have these conversations with clients about these interviews. If they come back to you and they had a bad interview, use that as a learning experience. We'll provide emotional support because that can be, it can be overwhelming, but always take that as a learning experience for the client. When I talk to clients, the 3 basic guidelines I give them for answering questions in interviews is answer briefly in an appropriate way without being rude, right? Answer in a way that relates to your ability to do the job, and smile and say you like to keep your personal life personal, because sometimes interviewers may want to get more personal and learn a little more about you, which is great. It makes the environment more inviting, more comforting. But then you also want to remind the client that this is a professional setting. So they may seem like they want to learn more, like, oh, do you have any kids? Do you have a husband? Do you have this? Again, which is inviting, but you don't have to answer those questions. You don't need to tell all about your personal life in interviews. That's not why you're there, right? So that's why I always tell clients that these are 3 very basic, of course, but 3 guidelines to follow. So this we see on every application even, you know, it always says it would be a violation of federal law for an employer to discriminate against any of these. So race, age, religion, disability, gender, marital status, children, and then any sort of arrests or convictions only in areas not related to the job duty. So if it's not related to the job responsibility, it is still a violation to discriminate against it, depending on the conviction, right? So it is inappropriate and illegal, leading to, you know, questions leading to discrimination in these areas, but it does happen. So I'll have clients tell me about their past interview, things they went through in interviews, but it's difficult because they'll tell me questions that they were asked and I know they're inappropriate and I know they're illegal. And that's what I'll tell the client, say, you know, you actually did not have to answer that if you felt uncomfortable, because they're honestly not allowed to ask that, you know? So it's providing the client with information to help them in the future, that they're not allowed to do this. Employers are not allowed to ask you if you have a specific disability, you know? So we're gonna go through these different areas and go over some, like, you know, legal, illegal for each one. So when it comes to disability, a lot of the time at the end, like, of an application, it'll ask about, you know, if there's any sort of disability for the applicant. And in an interview as well, it's supposed to be worded in a certain way that's not discriminatory. So you'll see it a lot. Can you perform the functions of this job with or without reasonable accommodation, right? Please describe or demonstrate how you can perform the functions. Like, give us proof that you can, you know, say that you demonstrate that you can. Like, can you meet the attendance requirements of the job? And then this one at the end, it is legal, but it can sometimes, it depends on why they took off. So how many days did you take off last year, right? But that depends. If the client, like in their past job, they had to take time off according to the Family Medical Leave Act, you don't have to disclose all of that to the interviewer, because that's your medical information, right? So how many days did you take off last year? The employees are guaranteed it provides 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So they are provided with that. Taking days off, that's not taking days off. That's using the time that you're given because of some sort of serious health condition. So to answer the how many days did you take off last year, if it was for something, a serious health condition, and it was under the Family Medical Leave Act, that does not have to be mentioned. You do not have to mention that. And then many of the questions illegally when it comes to disability is asking specifically about the disability, is saying, do you have AIDS or do you have asthma? Like, what is the disability? That's definitely not allowed. I always tell clients that to pay attention to what the interviewer is saying rather than how they're saying it. So if the interviewer is very friendly, like very like, you know, like maybe does ask the question, like, can you perform the function of the job with or without reasonable accommodation? Whether the person says yes or no, and they'd be like, oh, like, so what's your, do you have a disability? Like, do you have asthma, or like, have you struggled with things like that in the past? If they're saying it really friendly, like, sometimes it can catch people off guard. But again, you do not have to say any personal information. If, you know, they're not allowed to do that in general, right? Do you have a disability that would interfere with your ability to perform the job? It's not the way to word it. The way to word it was in the previous slide. They can't ask if you've ever filed for workers' compensation or have you ever been injured on the job. If any of these questions are asked, the client can, of course, say, you know, they can answer the same way every time. And that's what I've had a client do when they've been asked repeatedly about a disability. They'll just say, you know, I am fully able to do the job as required. You know, the details are not as important. I'm able to do the job as required with or without accommodations. especially when it comes down like how much alcohol do you drink each week? Have you been treated with mental health problems? Any sort of prescription drugs are you taking? These specific questions are not allowed. They are illegal. So the client does not have to answer them, even if it's in the middle of an interview. They have the right to say, I'm not comfortable asking that, or I'm not comfortable answering that, or that, that doesn't seem very important to the interview or the job. Let me talk about, some of the, I'd like to hear more about the job responsibilities. Is when a client is getting some of these questions that they're not comfortable with, I always tell the client to maybe try to redirect to get back on track, right? And I don't want to give clients more responsibilities to do in an interview because it's hard. It's being able to keep the interviewer on track. But if they're uncomfortable, I want to be able to let them know that they can let them know. They can say, I'm able to do this without these, I don't have to answer these questions. So when it comes to marital and family status as well, when I was researching this, a lot of it has to do with, as long as it's asked for both male and female applicants, it is permissible. Because if you're only asking this to female applicants, it's pretty much saying, so I know you take care of the children, can you fit this job into your schedule? That's what it comes down to. So they can ask, can you, is there any reason why you wouldn't be able to work the regular schedule for work? And you answer that honestly. You don't have to answer with, I have this many kids, this is the child care. You don't have to answer with marital status or the number of children you have. You don't have to give anything like that. You don't even have to give address or anything like that until you're hired. Any questions about sexual identity, orientation, or preference, not allowed as well. Clients do not have to answer that. That can also make people very uncomfortable. I don't think I've ever heard any clients tell me that they've had the experience that they were asked that in interviews, which is good. I think someone raised their hand. Or maybe that was a mistake, I don't know. I'll keep going though. Okay. So yes. And then we continue actually with there's more illegal here. They may ask like, how do you wish to be addressed? But again, that's going to show if you're married or not. So you can be, again, you do not have to answer that. Client does not have to answer that. Are you married, single, divorced, separated, widowed? Do you have a boyfriend/girlfriend? Again, sometimes these questions may be asked in like a friendly manner, trying to speak casually with in the interview, but that's not why the client is there. They're not there for a friendly conversation. They're there for an interview. And it's already uncomfortable enough to be put in that situation, but then feel the need to answer the questions that are being asked. If you're uncomfortable, it's a stressful situation. And then it's going to make people not want to go to these interviews. Also, an employer cannot ask about childcare arrangements. They just have to know that the person is able to meet the schedule. As long as the client continually says that, they don't have to mention if they have, like if the interviewer asks, do you have childcare plans for your children? The client does not have to answer, yes, these are my childcare plans. The client just has to say, I have all the necessary accommodations set up at home for me to be able to meet schedule requirements, right? It's all the way in wording. But yes, sometimes, so if some of these questions are answered, I had a client answer like, that's not something I usually discuss during an interview. I'd rather focus on more relevant information on the job opportunity. So again, trying to redirect to something that the client is more comfortable talking about. Again, we would hope that the interviewer wouldn't ask these questions and we wouldn't have to, teach clients how to redirect an interviewer. But a lot of the times I've had clients have good experiences with interviews. It's just some of those scary ones. You just want to be prepared. Okay, so related to gender. So the only really inquiry, or this inquiry is only permissible under I looked at bona fide occupational qualification. If this exists at the job, this is the only time that they can restrict employment because of gender. But for example, there's not many, this is extremely rare and there's not many, but there are some. So a manufacturer of men's clothing may lawfully advertise for male models and acting roles that require the specific gender, right? Or for example, there's for like the Catholic Church, they're going to hire someone within the Catholic Church to be a organizer or a, deacon, things like that. So that's the only time, those very specific circumstances are the only time where gender is even, a point in this. Besides that, applicant's gender, it can't be used as a factor for determining if they'd like the job or not. So I had a client tell me in an interview once, she's done, this client had done warehouse work her whole life. So this client's strong to begin with, but women will still get that attitude sometimes when the interviewer is a man that, can you fulfill the physical requirements? And the client knew that it was noticeable that he wanted to make sure, because he asked towards the end of the interview, he asked a third time about like, are you sure you will be able to keep up with the physical, the physical responsibilities, and kind of went a little more into detail. And the client, she took the time to, she goes, I have noticed that's you've asked me that a couple times, and, I have answered that before, but I will let you know that I am physically able to do the job requirements, and it was just it's so demeaning to have to be asked something like that a couple times. And then whenever I don't have many male clients, but when I do, and they'll be, go for like warehouse positions, they'll get those a lot easier, right? And they won't get those questions as much. So it does depend, and there is discrimination like that still. But yeah, just because the job involves physical labor or traveling away from work, it's not traditionally men's work or women's work, right? But yeah, any inquiry that indicates gender of an applicant would be illegal. And then any inquiry into the applicant's like caregiving responsibilities as well. So if you're going to be asking all the female applicants what the childcare arrangements are, that's discriminatory, obviously. Okay, so questions related to citizenship. Again, everyone sees these on applications, and the way it's worded is just the statement that you have to be eligible to work in the United States. They'll just give the quick statement when it comes to that. Let me see. So for illegal, any inquiries about citizenship or whether the applicant is or intends to become a U.S. citizen. So for this one, it would be like, so birthplace of applicant. So asking, so you're not from the United States, where are you from, right? And it sounds again like a very nonchalant question, but it's not. Again, a client does not have to answer that. That's not technically legal to ask the birthplace of the applicant or the birthplace of the applicant's parents, spouse, or other relatives. And then if they intend to become a US citizen, again, all they need to know is if they are eligible to work in the United States. Doesn't have to do with citizenship, as long as they're legally able to work in the United States. Does that make sense? So like details are not needed. You can't legally ask of what country are you a citizen. They also can't ask to see naturalized paperwork or first papers. So that's not, when it comes to work, you don't need those. You don't need to give that to your workplace. Only what's necessary to show that you're eligible to work in the United States. That's it. So when it has to do with asking about the family citizenship as well, that's not allowed. Right. So anything when it comes to, so you're not a US citizen. Do you want to become a US citizen? The client doesn't have to answer that. They don't have to answer if they want to become a US citizen or not. They just have to answer if they're eligible to work. That's it. right? So a question can be worded a couple different ways, but there's only a specific way that should be asked, and that's legal. But you know, these other questions that are inappropriate are still asked, you know, about where's your family from? Does your family have papers? And things like that. Okay. Questions relating to name. So you'll see this sometimes.
Nicole?
Yeah.
All right, this is Jennifer. We're getting some audio interference. I think it might be best to pause, and I'm asking you to switch over to phone audio if you can.
Of course, yeah, 1 sec.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're just going to take a brief pause for a moment.
Sorry, guys, thanks. Okay. 1 second. So now where can I see, let me see. Where can I see the number I can call?
If you click on the little up arrow next to the mute microphone, you should see in the menu switch to phone audio, and then it will pull up with the number to dial in, the meeting ID, your participant ID, and passcode.
Thank you so much. One second.
Can you hear me? Is this any better?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, I'm gonna put this on speaker. Okay, good. You can hear me a little better?
Yes, I can
Okay.
hear you.
Perfect. Thanks for letting me know. All right, just let me know if it goes out again. All right, good. So when it comes to questions related to name, they can ask, you know, if you've worked under another name. Have you worked for this college under a different name, right? Is there any additional information relative to name change, you know, things like that, legal name changes, or what names are work records listed under? So they can ask your name specifically when it comes to employment. But when it comes to inquiries about the name that you're trying to find the candidate's ancestry or descent, like what nationality is your last name, right? Again, very conversational. So sometimes you'd be caught off guard, but not something a client has to answer. It's not. They can say, you know, I'd rather not talk about that. Inquiries about the name change due to a court order. So, oh, why did you change your name? Did you change your name because you got married or because some sort of court order? They can't ask why. If there was a name change, why was there a name change? Can't ask why. And a lot of the time, they can't really ask the maiden name of a married woman, but that happens all the time still. So again, these legal, illegal, sometimes it's a very fine line, and it's not always caught. Like I've definitely been asked some of these like technically illegal questions in interviews, but it's because it's conversational. But at the same time, it's technically not a conversation. There's like a power difference there. There's an interviewer and the employer and an employee. One of the people there technically has more power than the other, you know? So conversational, it's nice, but you don't have to answer those questions. The person's you're already uncomfortable in an interview to begin with. You don't want to be talking about what ancestry your last name, what's your nationality of your last name, right? Okay. Age as well. So they just have to know that you're 18 years or older. If not, state your age, you know. So if you're under 18, that's when you have to state your age. But once it gets past that, they can't require the applicant to state their age or date of birth unless under 18. They don't need to provide any proof of age in any sort of, so like they don't need a birth certificate, right? You can't require the applicant to submit proof of age in like a birth certificate or naturalization papers. Not allowed to ask any question that may tend to identify applicants over 40 years of age. So a lot of the times my clients who are older, they don't want to put their what year they graduated high school on their resume, you know, because they're older, which makes sense. And the interviewer cannot ask, what year did you graduate high school? That's apparently something the client does not want to talk about. So empower them to say, listen, if you're asked that in an interview, just let them know that's, you know, it's not something you want to answer. You can say, I'd rather not share my age, but I can perform the job opportunities regardless. I can do the responsibilities regardless of age, right? But asking how old are you? What are the ages of your children? Again, very conversational, but not something that has to be disclosed. So there are questions related to arrests, and those are allowed, right? So asking about a conviction related to a job qualification. So that's if you're going for a driver position and they want your background check. And then also a lot of the time it's your driving abstract. If you have a DUI or if you have anything related to driving, they can say that's related to this job. So they don't have to give you the job because of that. Or they can ask for more specific information about the arrest because it's pertaining to the job responsibility, right? Other than traffic violations, of course, like small traffic violations. So unless the arrest is specifically about the job requirement, they're not supposed to ask specific about the specific arrest unless it's pertaining to the job. Or have you spent a night in jail? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. But no, it's normally asked, have you ever had a conviction of a crime related to the job? That's when they're really allowed to ask all of those things. And then a suggested answer, if they're asked, like, have you ever spent a night in jail or have you ever been arrested? You could say, I don't have background issues or any criminal record that would prevent me from performing this job or any arrests related to this job opportunity, right? The problem is, I think I have this on another slide later on. The problem is if they do a background check, something that is unrelated may come up, which happens, right? They're not allowed to ask more information about it, again, unless it has to do with the job. But a lot of the times I'll tell clients if it's an easy explanation and they rather tell the employer before the background check. Because after the background check, you kind of have to explain yourself, but you don't have to, but you know, they're going to ask about it. And if it's a job you really like, you want to be able to be honest. If it's something that's going to come up, you can mention it. Say, listen, there's something that is going to come up, but you know, but it's not related to this work, and it's not going to prevent me from doing this job. Okay, so explaining the past in interviews. So I'll talk to clients about this because they'll ask, like, what if they ask about my family in the interview? Like, is there any incidents where I'm going to have to bring up my domestic violence, or do I have to disclose that in the interview? And of course, you say no, you don't have to. If there's something you have to explain in your past, there's a way to do it. There's an appropriate way to do it. And this does not mean the client has to disclose everything in this explanation. So I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about like explaining the past, right? So like, for example, if the client has a resume that's mostly skills-based, right? And in the interview, the employer may say, it seems you've never worked before outside of the home, right? And they kind of ask like maybe a follow-up question. I always say a good response to kind of explain why you have, or you don't have to explain why you've never worked outside of the home, right? That's the thing. You don't need to explain why that's been like that. It could be because of the domestic violence, but the client doesn't have to be like, well, I've never worked outside the home because my husband didn't let me get a job or really get an education. I had to stay home with the kids. They don't have to go into all of that. It can be more of the, you're right, I never did work outside of the home, but I've been able to get relevant experience in other areas of my life, right? So if it's something like maybe you're applying for some sort of organizer job or receptionist job, you have to think, okay, so there's important aspects for those kinds of jobs or organization, and then like speaking to people, like customer service. So sharing related experience in like the community or any volunteering you've done, this can come to like sometimes. I had a client who she wasn't allowed to work, but she would babysit and she would watch the neighbors' kids. And one of them was severely disabled, and she would help the child and she would take care of the neighbor's kid. I told that client to use that as experience because she wanted to work in working with kids with disability. And yes, it's technically not with an organization and she wasn't being paid for it, but that's still experience that is important to talk about in interviews, regardless if it was with a organization or not. Like if a client is applying to a general receptionist job, highlight experiences that focus on the organization skills, computer skills, and customer service, right? And I know it's a stretch. You kind of have to stretch out, help the client stretch out what they've done if it's not technically work, like if it's not technically a solidified job. You want to be able to use what they have done and teach them how to advocate for themselves in interviews and say, I don't have work, but this is what I've done. I have this experience. Also, sometimes we'll get you have gaps in your work history. So I'll have clients where, she ended up quitting the job because the abuser was harassing her. So she moved back in with him, but then was able and didn't work for, I believe, 6 years. And then once she was able to leave, she was able to start applying to jobs again, but she has that big gap. And if she's asked that, employers will ask, that's not illegal to ask, like, why is there a gap in your work history? But I always tell the client, you can answer honestly, but without too much detail. Share what was done during those years, but relevant to the job. You don't have to say, all the other information surrounding why you have that gap. You can say, I focused on raising kids during the time, but I did manage, it may sound silly on the slide, but going about it as like, I did manage, it was 3 children. I was able to manage schedules, transportation, finances. So they can spin it as, yes, I took off time from work, but I had to take on all these other responsibilities where I've now kind of taken and going to use them in the jobs I'm applying to now, right? So there's a way to talk about, I want to just bring this up because clients feel like sometimes the domestic violence is the explanation for some of the things the employers are going to ask. So that's why I kind of just prep them when it comes to things they may be uncomfortable being asked. So that's why it's good to prep like this. So I've had a few clients get the year overqualified. This is because she was having trouble. She had her master's and she had some work experience, but she had a big gap as well. But she was, before that gap, she was very, very, she was very overqualified for what she was applying to now, but she was really trying to find a job. She just really needed anything. So if an employer says like it seems like you are overqualified, it seems like you have more experience than we would be able to give you. Sometimes that makes it sound like that. So I always tell the client, be gracious, but then clear about the desire for the job. So make it clear that, yes, so a good way to word it, I may have more experience, and or seniority than the job description requires, but I'm interested in the long-term growth in the job and in the company. So pretty much saying, yes, I may be overqualified, but I'm interested in working for the company and having, more growth somewhere else. Okay, so if this does come up, it could be an inappropriate question, but they do want to see you. The client can respond as, I rather not give details on it. A lot of the time, even if it is discriminatory, you may not get a call back from that interview, and it's tough, but it happens. But I always tell the clients, you can either explain it with less details or not explain it at all. It's what the client feels comfortable doing. So if they said you've been arrested or convicted of a crime not related to the job, but it did come up in the background check. So it is better to be upfront about anything the employer might discover. So for example, if you do have a DUI on your record, but it's for, we'll say like a customer service job or like a sales representative, you don't have to give details about the incident, but you can let them know, like, yeah, I do have a DUI on my record, but that's not going to have any effect on the job that I'm doing now. And it was a regretful decision, and it's not going to, again, affect my work performance. Wording it like that, like the arrest not related to the job is not going to hurt my work performance. But being upfront may be better. It's better I always tell the clients to make sure you know what's on your background check, just so there's no surprises as well. Oh, so important discussion. I always ask clients, like, it's better to ask this when you're more comfortable with the client. You have more of a rapport with clients, or you don't, you may not get a bad response from this, but asking a client what they're most afraid of to discuss in interviews, like what don't you really not want to be asked? Again, this is something apparently the client doesn't want to talk about, so you don't want to push it. But if they're comfortable, take the time with the client to see what those topics are and how to address them. So one of my clients, she was worried about talking about a DUI she got. There was a domestic violence incident. She had like a few glasses of wine, like at dinner. It was like 2 to 3 glasses. She ended up getting a DUI because she felt unsafe at the home because they started arguing. She felt unsafe because she wanted to leave. So she got in the car and drove away. Unfortunately, she was speeding, but he became aggressive, and that was the only way for her to get away. The client doesn't want to tell the interviewer all that information about the DUI, so she can simply say, I do have a DUI, but it's not going to affect what I'm doing now in my job. That was in the past, and I will be able to perform all the job responsibilities and be a professional. So I always have these clients bring these up to me first, so then we can discuss the best way to respond. Instead of this client being asked this in an interview, maybe caught off guard, and then maybe sharing more than he or she wants. Can you still hear me okay?
This is Jennifer. Yes, we can.
Okay, cool, thanks. So when you're discussing with clients about how to respond to certain issues and disclosing certain issues, I always go over the pros and cons, right? What would the pros be for disclosing issues in interviews? So this could be maybe about the arrest that has nothing to do with the job. You do appear, and you are being honest and trustworthy. you're bringing up something, you're kind of taking, you're saying this did happen. So you're being honest. You're putting their mind at ease because there's no surprises. The client wants to make sure there's no surprises when the client starts working as well. And it puts the client's mind at ease after they disclose it. It could be like a weight on their shoulders. And then once they kind of get that off, they feel a little better. But so there will be no surprises if everything is kind of out on the table. And then being responsible and proactive about disclosing these issues. So there are positives to it. There are some pros. Then there are also going to be cons as well, as there always are. Maybe the interviewer is going to be concerned about your credibility now, because even if the DUI has nothing to do with customer service, maybe they look at it as, maybe she was being irresponsible, Even if they're not allowed to discriminate against an arrest that has nothing to do with the job, it's going to happen. You can't stop the interviewer from thinking these things or from having a certain bias after that. And it's really difficult, and it makes disclosing issues even more difficult because you don't know the response you're going to get. So that may be a problem. Sharing too much may impact the employer's decision. So maybe if the client got too much into the reason for the DUI, it could impact. We, again, hope that a DV incident wouldn't impact if a client was going to get a job or not. But you honestly never know. You don't know the interviewers well. You don't know the company well yet either. You don't know how they work with employees and if they treat them well. So you don't know any of these things yet. And revealing personal information does feel risky and unsafe. One of the things I always make sure is the area where the client is applying to jobs, if the area is in the abuser's community as well. You don't know who the abuser knows, so you want to be careful of also what you're disclosing in the interview. But this is only if, clients who still live in a small town, or they know the abuser knows everyone. It really depends on the client and their circumstance. But I had a client who went to an interview and she recognized the interviewer as someone her husband was friends with or talked to. And she felt too uncomfortable and just, made up an excuse and left. But it's good to, just in case that situation comes up, it's good to ask if it's a small community and if maybe the abuser may know the interviewer. I think that's only happened to 2 clients I know, that they knew that the interviewer knew the abuser. But again, that's only if you're just applying within the neighborhood, you still live together, things like that. Okay, so I wanted to get a little into changing name in the New York State, because when it comes to licenses and giving documentation to employers, it's important to make sure everything matches as much as possible, to be honest. So there is a process to changing if you change name. I wanted to bring this issue up as well. One of the populations that the YWCA, at least in New Jersey, we're trying to reach out to more is the LGBTQ, and especially transgender. When they're trying to change their names or change their gender, it is such a long process. And it's sad that it's so long, and it makes it more difficult if they don't have names and genders maybe matching on paperwork. For work, the gender doesn't really matter, but they want to make sure names match. So I just wanted to bring this up as an issue if anyone does have any transgender clients who had to go through this whole name change or gender change process. The gender change process on identification is a lot longer. But I wanted to just go through some of the things for just changing the name. And this is going to be in each specific state, but it is a lot of the same. So first, obtaining the court-ordered name. So you pretty much go to the court and pick and get the name that you need, right? There's a whole process when you go on on your state website. It'll give you information on how to get the court-ordered name. And then you're going to update the information with the Social Security office. Probably one of the most important because that's normally what you're giving to work. I always say Social Security card is the best thing to give to work. It's better than I don't know. It's just birth certificate is a lot of information to give. I used to give birth certificates and then I stopped. It's just, you know, I have a few clients that say, I have my birth certificate, can I give that? But they don't have to if you have another form of identification. But if you are changing gender, you need a lot more information apparently to provide. You need proof of transition using one of the following. So you need a valid 10-year passport with the updated gender, a birth certificate showing updated gender, court order recognizing change of gender, or a signed letter from a doctor on letterhead showing appropriate clinical treatment. So you need a lot more when it comes to changing gender. And then as well, making sure that you change the name on the state ID or driver's license with the local DMV. I know that can be a pain in the neck now, but it is important, especially for changing names if you're going for work. I would keep everything updated if possible, and then bring the court-ordered name change with you. I would say that's most important, bringing that to every appointment when you're changing names. Just bring that court-ordered name change. Making sure to update insurance, financial records, and school or employment records. So when a work may ask for authorization to make sure you have a specific education, you want to make sure that the names are matching on everything. So name on health insurance as well. Like school records, I've had clients, if they did change name, I've only had one client actually, but they spoke with the school, and they, as long as she was able to give everything to the school, they were able to change her name on her educational records. So you just have to follow the correct procedure for that by just going to for insurance, financial accounts, going to your specific bank for this financial accounts, just being comprehensive in everything. Oh, also for car and home insurance. If the job that the client is going for needs a driver's license or car insurance, you want to make sure the name is matching as well. And then they can apply for an updated passport in person or by mail. I'm not sure if they're doing by mail right now, but to update gender, they need to submit a physician confirming that there was the clinical treatment. But you do not need that for the name. And then some people do apply for the updated birth certificate. You don't need to do that, of course, again, because clients are not always giving birth certificates to jobs. For New York State, you ask the Department of Health to update the birth certificate by completing an application, pretty much. And that's like that in a lot of states. There's a certain application you just have to fill out to change it on your birth certificate. So it's just important to keep in mind if clients are going through this process, just to guide them. Unfortunately, when it comes to things like this, they're really the ones that have to do most of the work and reach out to the places and go. Getting the necessary documentation is one of the most important things, and just helping clients through that. When I've helped a client once with it, we just kind of you just have to reach out to all the different places that have the documentation you need, but it takes time, but it's, people do it. And then actually for New York State, the Gender Recognition Act, it's going to affect in 2021, but soon you will not need a physician letter to be able to change your gender on your ID. That's for New York State. It was recently passed. And then this is the one also with, they're going to be putting gender X on IDs when a person asks for it, but that doesn't start until 2022, I believe June. So that's for New York State, but definitely, look at your own states and see if there's anything like that that's in the process of being passed, because that's something that would make the process a lot easier. I always have like two client examples at the end here. this client, she did not have much experience. She didn't like talking positively about herself ever. She was with her husband for 15 years and had just recently left. But she hasn't heard a nice thing about herself in a very long time, other than maybe family members. She was very isolated though as well. So she didn't talk to many people. So her her self-esteem was just not, she didn't think there was anything positive about herself. So I had to really sit down with her and go through like positive, like skills. I asked her, like, what are your 5 main skills? And she's like, I don't have any. But we as advocates know if a client says that, we know they're not right. That's not true. We know they have skills. They have a lot of positives about themselves. They just don't see it yet, right? So we need the client to see those positives so the interviewer can see those positives. If the client doesn't believe that they're capable of doing the job, it's going to be hard to kind of pass that off in the interview. So it's really just talking up the client and just practicing interviews with them. But this is actually the client. She was applying to organizations who work with children with disabilities because she wanted to help others. And this specific client, she actually has been, her son is disabled. This is actually another client. There's been a lot of clients. For this one, her own child has had severe disabilities. It's one of the reasons why she didn't have much work experience, because she couldn't do much besides take care of her son. And he was, let's see how, I think it was like 12. So that's 12 years of experience working with someone with a disability, right? And she didn't look at it that way. She didn't, of course, see it that way because it's her child. And you have to do it, I was, of course, doing it in a manner where I was trying not to offend her in any way, like taking care of her child was a job. But I needed her to see that you've done so much, and the skills that she's learned are so important and can be used to talk about in interviews and to be able to get a job. So we went over the skills that she's learned. Her self-esteem did go up, thankfully, because she's once I got her to write down like everything she's done pretty much for her son that would normally not have to be done if the son didn't have a disability, she was like, wow, okay, so I've really learned she can really take care of anyone in that population because of the different age ranges as he's grown up as well. So it just expands her experience. So she ended up getting a job in working with children with disability with that. And the only thing on her, I put it on her resume too, because she didn't have a resume. And I was able to put, like independent client as, her child. I wasn't going to put child, but you're able to put all that experience she had, regardless if it was her child or not, because it's still experience and it still matters, right? And then I have my last one here. She actually came to the United States recently from another country. She didn't have much work experience except childcare and cleaning. When I was talking to her about interviewing, this was kind of an eye-opener for me. So I talked to her about, I just mentioned interviews, and she was a little confused. And then we both realized it was because when the job that she had for child, she knew everyone. So the way she knew how to get a job is she knows someone who needs help. That's the way she was able to find a job, and where she was from, and that's how everyone she knew got a job. There were no interviews. You either knew someone who knew someone and just didn't need an interview. So we had to start from like the bottom up on interviews. And then she went on her first interview and it was not good. She said she was really nervous, so she was shaky. And the interviewer had actually mentioned it. He goes, "You look nervous," which made her more nervous. So, she kind of took that experience and we kind of learned from it. So she realized, like, I do want to work in childcare. So we prepped specifically for interviews that take care of childcare centers and what they're normally looking for. And then once we were able to practice more, she was actually able to find a job in childcare. But sometimes that experience is needed to be able to maybe, learn from it. We don't want that to be like everywhere in life, but when it comes to interviews, sometimes that happens. You got to go through a bad one first to kind of learn how to go through a good one. But for this one specifically, she didn't know what to put on her resume either, because it was just housekeeping and she was just babysitting. But babysitting holds a lot of skills, and that can relate to like getting a first aid certification here, something like that. So once I talked with client about what to bring up in interviews and what employers are looking for, then they're able to do well in those interviews, but it's tough. And I think that is it for the presentation, but I do want to answer questions because I want to see if there are some. And then any questions that I cannot answer right away, I will bring, the information will be here next time.
Thank you, Nicole. This was really great. I think going through all these questions that are legal and illegal was very kind of eye-opening for me too.
Yeah.
And how much like really kind of like, I gotta say, involuntarily we expose things or talk about things, or like informally getting questions without noticing like all this question can actually be illegal, and it's not like something you probably have to answer.
Yeah.
I'm not actually seeing any questions. I don't know if anybody has any question here that they wanna either put in the chat or like put in the Q&A, because we're still here and we can like answer them.
That's fine.
I think there was something in the chat box that one of the something in the chat box that one of the participant was talking about is like, when they ask you about the gap in your job, you don't have to answer this way. And you and she was like, but if you don't answer, you won't get the job, you know, or they wouldn't consider you for that job. So you will lose your chance, which is true. So you're concerned about the consequence.
Exactly. Yeah. There are it depends. It's so difficult. It's really like and I've had clients go on so many interviews and they're like, is it me? It's difficult because when clients go on, you know, we're trying to build up their motivation and advocate for them to, you know, go on these interviews and find work. And then they go on 5 interviews and they haven't gotten a job. It's hard to, and they're asking me why. And it's not like they know I know, but who else are you going to ask? Or it's like, is there something I'm doing wrong, or is it just me? And then if those interviews aren't going well, then it's just going to reflect, they're not going to feel great about themselves. So it's important in the job search.
Yes, that's true. Well, we just got another question along that line about how do we advise for a situation that interviewer views the client as a difficult person for not answering the illegal questions?
So that's when we can't stop interviewers from not hiring someone, because if the client doesn't answer a question that the interviewer asks and the interviewer does not hire them because of that, then that's not a great employer, or, you know, it's hard, because I've had a client ask me that and they'll say like, so if I don't respond to a question that I don't want to respond to, is that going to hurt my chance? And I honestly have to say, it depends. It really does. Sometimes employers will be like, okay, I respect that. And reporters are good and they respect that the client doesn't want to answer that. Or if they don't want to answer it and the employer gets annoyed, just because maybe the employer doesn't know that it's not a legal question to ask. But it really depends on what it's up to the client. If the client wants to answer a question because she wants a better chance of getting the job, that's understandable. But then they also have to realize if the answer could also maybe stop the employer from hiring them as well. You know, so it's like if someone starts talking about their children and, you know, their children's schedules and having like a good conversation with the interviewer, we don't know what the interviewer's thinking, and technically they're not allowed to discriminate, but they can be thinking, she has 3 kids, how is she going to have time for this job, kind of thing. And that's when it gets, and like I would never think that. I don't want to think that, but that's what interviewers think. So it's tough, because not answering something may be better than answering something. But it's hard when the interviewer, we don't want them viewing it as the client, the person being difficult, just the person not being comfortable answering the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. And I actually have a question myself. Like, so if there is a requirement for a job, like, you are skillful in writing or something like that, but it's not written anywhere in the job description, and it hasn't been discussed in the previous interview, and you go for like another interview and they ask you to do a writing sample, is that legal or illegal?
So if one employer, is it the same employer you're talking about for like a second interview?
No, it's just a question that like it came to my mind, that would they be required to tell the interviewee that like there is some requirements, like you have to do this test, or you have to give us
Gotcha.
this writing sample or something,
So when it comes to writing samples and things like that, I do tell the clients to do those. Like if you like turn down like a writing, like they ask like, could you give us this writing sample? I don't think they would. A lot of jobs don't do that, but I know these, a lot of the jobs, you need to be able to write something, whether it be warehouse or something like that. So, but they are allowed to ask for a writing sample. Yeah, that happens. And it's tough because of a client, if a client doesn't maybe write good English or read good English, that's when they may have to be honest and say, I'm not great, but this is the best I can do. But it's tough when it's related to the job. A lot of the times they can make a writing sample related to the job as well, like part of the job responsibility. But if it's like, I'm trying to think, like if a job does not require any sort of math, and they're having them take like a math thing, then the client can definitely ask, like, is this needed in the job responsibility? If it really has nothing to do with it, at that point I would question. But when it comes to like a writing sample, clients normally just do those.
Right. Because like, when they put you on a spot to do a test, like, do they?
I hate that.
That's the question. Like, do they have to give you like prep that you have to do this test? That's like the question. It's not about asking about like doing the test or writing something. It's about like how they do it. Like, is it illegal to do it on a spot, like right there?
No, I don't think so. The funny thing is, I've never had, if there was ever a writing sample needed, it was for the second interview, but sometimes it happens on the spot, and that's not illegal, no. Like sometimes I had a client go from like the first interview to the second interview right afterwards. And the second interview, they made her do a writing sample, but then she was hired the same day. So it's not, yeah, so it does happen, and it puts people on the spot, and I don't like that, but they can do that, yeah.
Right. I don't know if there is any question
All right.
that anybody would like to ask.
Next week is going to be more about like the best ways for clients to answer just normal interview questions. We're just going to be going over a lot of interview questions, like all legal now, and just the best way for clients to answer, the best practices we've used when working with clients in these interviews, and like how we kind of hold the mock interview with clients. That's what we're going to do next. They're going to talk about next week.
Great, that's wonderful. I'm just gonna give it a minute if anybody has a question or they would like to ask anything.
Of course.
Well, if there is no other questions or comments, Oh, somebody just asked something. Do you have suggestion for clients who were fired from a previous job due to interference from abuser?
Oh, so if the client, oh, so why did you leave your last job? When it comes to that, clients, when I've asked clients what they feel comfortable with, I was like, would you feel comfortable? What would you feel comfortable with saying? And most of them say, well, I would not feel comfortable telling that the abuser interfered in work, mostly because the employer could see that as a safety issue.
Mhm.
Now, if it is a very bad safety issue, it's something you may want, it depends, because if the abuser got aggressive at the workplace and it's maybe on record somewhere at the workplace, then the employer may be able to find out. But if it didn't have anything to do like with that, when it says, why did you leave your last job? A lot of the times clients will just say for personal reasons. Like that's probably one of the answers that clients will say a lot. And if they get like, if a lot of the times they'll get like, can you give more details? And they could just say at that point in my career, I didn't, I did not feel that job was necessary anymore, or my growth stopped at that job. It's hard to go into, well, my husband made me leave, or my husband continually called the office until they fired me. So a lot of the times clients will answer discreetly and say like either personal reasons, or they were ready to grow at another agency. They're ready to grow at another company. But if they were fired, that's different. Like if the client was fired due to interference from the abuser, like the abuser came and it was a safety issue, they may have to disclose that. And that's when you prep a little more for that and talking about how to disclose that to the employer. But if it wasn't something they were fired for, if they just left because the abuser kind of maybe forced them out, they do not have to, I don't advise them to, let them know that. Again, details, they don't need to know details unless it's a very bad safety issue.
That's true.
No problem.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Is there any other question? I don't think I'm seeing anything right now. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll see you next week. And yeah, Jennifer just shared everything again on the chat box. Next week, at the same time, on the I think it's Thursday, right? So
Yeah, Thursday 10. Yep.
okay. So we'll be discussing more about the interview guidelines.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole and the interpreters. Have a good day.